Hi, welcome to our SEO hug on the SEO checklist for our website launch. This is a recording of an event that we have previously done, and it's just our team, so it's going to be just simple and straightforward. You can ask questions by leaving comments on the video or reaching out to us. Our emails are included at the end of the event. So let's dive right in. So hug groups, HubSpot user groups, that's the HUG, HubSpot user group. They used to be in-person events that HubSpot helps facilitate so that people in different locations can get together and collaborate and share their love for all things HubSpot. But they're really part of an initiative to help HubSpot users get to meet each other and network and be part of just a group together and to knowledge share. And so we are very honored to be selected as the leaders of the SEO hug. And we're based here in the Cayman Islands. So next time when we can do an in-person event, you should come on down. We'll hit the beach. It'll be a great time. So I am joined today by Missy Williams.
Hello.
Missy is a very passionate technical SEO and is just a huge valuable asset for SEO on our team. My name is Tanya. I'm the founder of Chronix Digital, and I also have a background in SEO. So you are joining us today to nerd out on all things SEO, and you'll tell that we love what we do. We're also joined on our call with Fiona, who's going to help remind us to do all the things we need to do to make this run smoothly, and who'll probably jump in with questions as we go too. So our agenda, what we're going to cover is we're going to take a look at what you need to be on top of before you launch your website, while you're launching your website, after you launch your website, and then how you're going to report on your website launch. So what we have experienced time and time again when we do a website launch is that the website owner or the company CEO or whoever's driving this initiative, they want to change their website for a key reason. Maybe it's a shift in messaging, shift in audience, just new products, maybe it's just a new brand, and they want to change everything, but they want to keep all of the SEO value the same or improved. So as you know, the SEO on the project, that creates a huge problem for you to change it, but keep it the same. So often what happens for pre-launch and post-launch, if you haven't done all that pre-launch work, you are doing a little bit of spot the difference post-launch, because you have to go back and fix something. Maybe a page is missing, maybe you can't find a URL, and trying to nitpick that difference and identify those gaps and what's missing when you might not have access to any of that old information anymore. So that's really important that we do all the pre-launch setup so that we can get it all together. So I'm going to kick it over to Missy here.
So looking at kind of the main overall elements in pre-launch planning, we really want to document what the current state of the website is, document all the current URLs, all the SEO elements of the page, so the title tag and meta description, header tags, things like that. Also do baseline SEO metrics. So you want to pull your, all your reporting beforehand, so you have data to compare afterwards. For analytics, you want to check your tracking and triggers, and then identify any opportunities for improvement. Of course, when it comes to site speed and performance, that's really important for SEO. So you really want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward and fixing any issues that you haven't been able to fix on the current site when you're doing, creating a new website. So we'll break down a little bit more detail for each of these. So when you're documenting the current pages, I always recommend crawling the old site and the new site that's currently in development, so you can kind of compare. I use Screaming Frog, to crawl that. It gives you basically every SEO piece of your site. You can save that crawl, export Excel files, so you have those to compare. Document all the SEO elements again, in status codes from the old site. So you want to identify any broken links, redirects, things that you want to fix, on the new site. And this helps to create a redirect map from the old site to the new site. So if you have, especially if you're doing a lot of URL changes or consolidating pages, a redirect map is really going to help maintain some of that SEO value as you pass that along to the new URLs. And lastly, for migrating the SEO elements and page content, whether you have to copy and paste that or you can import that into the new CMS for all the pages and update obviously accordingly. And then as we look at baseline SEO metrics. So some of the things that you want to look at is to measure your keywords. So a lot of times tools are kind of a snapshot and it's hard to get past data and past rankings. So, use a tool such as Ahrefs to gather your current rankings. You want to measure traffic, organic traffic specifically is good to look at. Conversions to look, document where, what the trends are and what conversions you're pulling in. And then any other key metrics that like events or other things that you're, currently tracking and reporting on. So as we look at tracking and triggers, so, it's going to be a little bit different if you have a new domain rather than if you're using the same domain. If it is a new domain, you want to set up those properties in Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager, Google Search Console to make sure you're all ready to go when the new site is launched. Whether it's the current website and you're using the same Google Analytics and Tag Manager or creating a new one, you want to make sure you set up goals and events and any tags that for the new goals. So you might have different plugins that you're using for forms or different ways that they're going to a different thank you page. You want to make sure to set those up beforehand so you're ready to go when the site launches and able to track those from the get-go. And then, identifying opportunities for improvement. Some of the things that, really looking at internal redirects, fixing those. You might have some various versions of your website or pages on the website, such as some that are www, some that are non, some, secure and non-secure versions of the site. So you want to make sure to kind of stick with one of those. Obviously, you want the secure version, and then to choose either the www or non to use as your kind of main site, and make sure you're updating all those other URLs to that main domain. Looking at canonical tags and any issues with those. Evaluating your sitemap, your robots files, no index, no follow tags. If you have any issues with that, you want to make sure that you're, identifying if you need to add those. 404 errors, obviously this is a big thing. You want to make sure you don't have any errors. So if there's issues on the current site, making sure you don't transport those over to the new site. And then core web vitals, obviously a very important thing that we've been talking about in the SEO world this last year. If your site isn't meeting those core web vitals, look at opportunities to, whether it's reducing, your largest content will paint or any kind of stability issues on your site. You want to make sure that you're all set to go, that you can get that ranking boost on the new site.
One thing we haven't specifically mentioned here, but I think it's worth mentioning, is with the 404 errors. Often if you have a site that's been managing your redirects in like an htaccess file, and then you move your site over and you don't take those with you, like you've lost all of the redirects that you've put in place previously. And that can be a bit of a nightmare to clean up too.
Yeah, definitely.
So we wanted to structure this, we have this checklist and we would like to share this checklist with you as a PDF. If you want it, reach out. But really, as we get into the nitty gritty, it all comes down to specific use case. So these are some of the common questions that we get. Like, Missy, how do I crawl my site if I have robots.txt on and I keep getting that error, we can't crawl your site because it's no index?
Yeah, so this is probably one of the biggest things we might see when if a site's launching, is if you have that disallow. That's usually a thing developers do, is they add a disallow for your whole site on the robots file, which is basically telling any robot to not crawl your site. So this will possibly block any crawlers like Screaming Frog from crawling your site as well. There is a setting within that you can adjust to not follow the robots file. So when you're, obviously in the pre-launch stage, you don't want that indexed while you're developing it, you can turn that off, so you can actually crawl that. But obviously you want to remember, and we'll talk about that in the just before launch stage, you want to make sure to take that disallow off your robots file before launch, or none of your pages will be indexed. So that's a pretty big thing.
Yeah, that one comes up a lot at every stage here.
No.
A question I get a lot is, when should I add my analytics tags to the new site? There's always that fear of double counting and diluting and, making the analytics that you have not very good. But for most sites, you're good to put analytics on the new site, a little bit before launch, just to make sure it's in place, get it tracking. You can set up different filters so that you're not double tracking. It really depends on your site, but for most sites, you can have a bit of an overlap and be okay. It's almost better to have too much that you can filter out than to have a gap without your analytics. If something goes wrong and you miss data, you can't get that data back.
Good point.
Will my rankings plummet if I change my text or design elements?
So this is, a big thing that you see, especially if you're doing a really big overhaul of the website. The answer is really, it depends. It depends how much you're changing, how many pages you're, consolidating or removing. If you're getting rid of a whole, a ton of your blog pages and that brought in a lot of traffic, you could see changes there. It just really depends on even the quality of traffic. A lot of times, if you do your pre-planning well and you get rid of pages that weren't really receiving a lot of traffic, especially from organic, and weren't helping the site, you might see certain keywords, that you lost, and maybe a little bit of traffic that you are losing from those. But you got to really think about quality, and if that's affecting conversions, if you're really getting the right audience to the site with the new updates that you make, that's really the most important thing.
Yeah, Missy, you and I were talking about this yesterday with two different site examples. One did a mass content consolidation and lost a lot of rankings and panicked because they're losing a lot of rankings. But when you tie it back to those key business objectives, like the type of things they were ranking for wasn't necessarily relevant to what they were actually doing and who they wanted to speak to.
Exactly.
Where another site that we talked about, it's not so much they consolidated, they kind of went the opposite route, where they used to be really focused on one service offering, but then launched a new website with a handful of service offerings. So they had to change the content on their homepage and their main landing pages to shift away from that main focus. And they saw a drop in rankings because now their content is diluted across other services. So it's changing and shifting which pages are ranking for those key keywords. So it's not the main homepage anymore. Now it's that main service page, and really bringing into the fold and accounting for the increase that you see for those other services as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when should you get an SEO specialist involved? As SEO specialists, we see these situations, yes, and sometimes you're like, we could have avoided this. When would you say that we should be involved?
Yeah, I definitely think in the early stages of the planning, so making those big decisions on content and what's being, removed, what's being added to the site. SEOs have special talents in doing keyword research, identifying, what pages are performing well, and can help to make those big decisions where others might look at things and more just design or site structure and not really think of rankings or what's really driving that quality traffic. So I think the earliest that the SEO specialist can get involved, the better. That's really going to make for a most successful site launch.
And this is an interesting one that actually came up this week on a call I had with someone who just launched a new site that had a ton of 404s. And she said to me, she's like, oh, those pages aren't important, so I don't need to put in redirects. What would you say to her on that one?
Yeah, so, 404 errors are, first of all, they should always be fixed. If you can update the actual, especially when you're doing a redesign, that's an opportunity to, add in the correct links as opposed to redirects. But if you have 404 errors because another site is using, an old link, it's, you're losing, it's a bad user experience, as well as lost traffic. If, or someone that, comes to the page looking for a certain thing, and if they aren't redirected to a relevant page, they might just leave your site. So, it's kind of a lost opportunity either way, if you don't include those redirects for 404 errors.
Totally agree. So now we have our site ready to go. We're ready to launch. What are the SEO things we need to do right before launch?
Yeah, so, this is usually a couple days, before launch, getting, all your ducks in the row at crunch time. You obviously want to add in all those redirects from your redirect maps. You've planned those out properly. Make sure that all those using, a plugin or, a tool such as HubSpot has, you can add in redirects there. Updating your XML sitemap to match the new site. So this is, whether you're using HubSpot or another CMS, and whether it's automatically created or you need to create your own. You want to make sure that you're including only the URLs that you want, and that the URLs are, the new URLs, and you don't have, any broken links or redirects or anything listed in your sitemap. For sitemaps, you want to be sure to include any images, PDFs, videos that are relevant. These are, really important things for a lot of sites to show visually. There's a lot of kind of handouts or takeaways that in PDF form that often get ignored and not really thought of as important. But these can actually get indexed as well. And these can help drive, really relevant to the traffic to the site, especially depending on, what kind of product or service your site offers. If it's, images are really important, that can drive a different kind of traffic than regular text links. You obviously, you want to add the sitemap to the robots file. I see this in a lot of robots files where they don't add the link to the sitemap, and especially if you have like an index sitemap, you want to make sure that has a different, URL than the standard. You want to make sure to add that. And then this is really, as we mentioned, kind of number one, the thing that could really, deter your efforts with the new site is remove any rules that are blocking your site or any sections of the site from being crawled, right before launch. So you make sure that, you're all set to go, that Google and other search engines are able to crawl and index your website.
Yeah, that's probably the number one.
We could put lots of stars around that. That'd be.
This is every step.
Yeah. We were talking about that. We've all seen websites that have done this, or that they've come to us and said, I don't know what happened. we launched a site a month ago and our rankings tanked and we aren't indexed for all these pages, and we know where to look.
Yeah.
The first place.
Sometimes it's easy to be a hero.
Exactly.
So some of the things, like if you're using WordPress, you're probably familiar with Yoast. Yoast is great for generating your XML sitemap, and you can update your robots.txt in it. If you're using HubSpot, you might not know that if you go into your domains and URL setting, there's a sitemap tab and you can view your XML file. So you can, if you have multiple domains, you can switch your domains and you can add pages or remove pages from your XML sitemap this way. In your website settings, you also have your robots.txt file access there. So you can get in and make edits there pretty easy as well. So some FAQs, I want to touch on this one because it's come up a few times for us recently. Should I launch overnight? It's really common and really popular to do a website launch overnight because that's generally when you have the least traffic. It's the least disruptive to, your potential visitors. And the answer, like all great SEO questions, is it depends. If you have a super large site that has a lot of traffic and people are going to be on it, you definitely do want to schedule for the downtime. But in those situations, you probably also have a pretty sufficient team to make sure that you can address all of these things quickly. If you are more of a small to medium-sized business and you rely on the help of others, maybe external vendors, agencies, if you launch overnight and you have any troubles, you might have a hard time accessing the resources that you need to get it back up. So that's the big consideration, is not just how impactful is it to your visitors, but if something goes wrong, do you have the support available to fix it? So we often see people like pushing, let's launch by the weekend. We just want to get this done, like wrap it up our plate. It's Friday at noon. I just want to have this done. But if it goes wrong, you're working well into the weekend on it. So Friday is not a great day to launch a website.
Yeah, I've actually been on website launches where they plan to launch overnight and then decide in the morning, they're like, we had issues, couldn't launch. And they had to go back to the drawing board on, getting the right teams involved. So.
And that's tough because then you're tired because you just pulled out an all-nighter.
Exactly.
Who needs to be notified about a site launch? Hey, Missy, I launched my site yesterday. You should check it out.
Yeah, that's pretty important to have basically anyone that's involved in updating the site, anybody that's involved in marketing efforts, whether it's offline or online. Obviously, online is going to be driving, a lot of direct traffic, but even your offline efforts, you want to make sure that you pause campaigns, or, you don't launch, you have a lot of social posts planned without them knowing, hey, we want to make sure everything's working properly before, we start things back up. So, it's important to anybody that's really involved in marketing and sharing links to the website, that they're aware, even an large organization, it's always helpful even to send something company-wide to get, to let people know, so they're aware, especially if someone asks them, what's going on to your site, and they can pass that along to you if there's any issues.
Yeah, and if you have a large site or a large organization, you may not be fully aware of how different people in your organization use your site differently. So letting people know that your site has launched is really great to get that quick user feedback. If, perhaps you forgot to move over all your sales support PDFs, you can find that rather quickly. Speaking of PDFs, what should you include in your XML sitemap? Should you have a list of PDFs?
I think that having, whether you do it all in one file or have an index file that lists, a separate XML sitemaps for your images, one separate for your PDFs, one for your videos. I think any pages that you want your users to find organically, and resources as well, making sure that you include those in the sitemap is really important. And then as we look at robots file as well, if there's any landing pages that are only supposed to be specific to a certain audience or a specific offer that you want to disallow and not have people, actually you don't want those indexed. You want to put a disallow of those in your robots file to make sure that, that users aren't crawling those or that users aren't seeing those that you don't want. And also, in the XML sitemap, you want to make sure to include some things that on like WordPress will add things like authors and categories from your blogs. And if you're really not utilizing those, especially the authors, if you don't have robust author pages that have information that's relevant, that you actually in there set up and formatted properly, you should really, not include those in the XML sitemap. Some CMS tools allow you just to uncheck to not include any of those pages. Some you have to, manually, create that to not include them. But I would say any pages you aren't putting your best foot forward and representing your brand by showing them to users, you should not include in the sitemap. And if they're linked from anywhere, you can always add those as disallow files in the robots file as well.
Yeah, I'd also add in there too that just because you've disallowed it in robots.txt doesn't mean that Google's going to listen to it. Adding your no index, no follow tags to the pages individually is a good way to double protect yourself. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Google gives us guidance on what to do to identify these pages we don't want included, but it's completely at their discretion what is and what isn't included. So better to dot your I's, check your T's, do everything you can to help ensure it. And if it's something you really, really don't want, password protect the page, gate it, or, don't have it up easily accessible to everyone.
Yeah. And definitely any links that, if someone is able to see your link, they may share it from another website. And sometimes Google finds URLs from other, links from other websites. So adding that no index, no file tag to the page also, prevents when Google isn't coming in straight from your robots or, XML sitemap files.
So post-launch, what are some of the things that we should do? Site's up, we're good, our work's done?
You wish, but no, there's still, a lot of work to do. You want to double check everything to make sure, everything was done properly, that you don't have any issues that would affect your SEO rankings and, the user experience on the site. So, you want to review the technical items, look at the robots file. You can test that in Google Search Console. You can test certain URLs, plug them in and see if they are being blocked or not. Testing canonical tags and redirects, making sure those are all working properly. Obviously, your analytics is really important. So you want to make sure your tracking is working properly, doing some tests and submissions on goal conversions, just to do live tests to see, if everything is tracking. You don't want to get, months down the line and realize you were missing a whole, a bunch of tracking and don't have, any access to those anymore.
Yeah, we see that a lot with event listeners. If you have, if you're using event listeners in Google Tag Manager, you're like, oh, it'll just carry over to the new site. But often the triggers that are happening are different. And so they don't fire anymore. Or if you have it encoded in your page is changed. And now all of your event tracking and therefore conversion tracking is different.
Yeah, definitely not something you want to miss when that's, tracking events and conversions is really going to help you understand how successful your website launch is. So you want to make sure you have that data. The next thing, I would submit the XML sitemap to Google Search Console so they can recrawl all the current pages. This is especially going to be important if you have a lot of changes in URLs. You want to make sure that the right pages get indexed, the other pages get de-indexed that no longer exist. So this is really just going to help for the overall health of the site to make sure, you know, the right pages are showing up in search results. And also crawl the new site to identify any missing SEO elements or errors. So again, using Screaming Frog is a great tool to really, you know, it consolidates how many title tags are missing, or if you have 404 errors or any other, you know, odd errors that are showing up. These are items that might have not get passed over that you missed. You want to make sure that you're identifying those early on and correcting those. Checking load times to optimize post-launch. So, you know, site speed obviously is becoming more and more important. You know, you want to make sure that the new site is not slow. If there's any issues, you know, like you said, we're not done yet. We still, you know, SEO is really an ongoing game. You want to be constantly improving. So, you know, if there's further optimizations to be made to speed up the site, have it perform better, those are, you know, opportunities you want to make sure, you know, you're finding early on. And then, you know, again, if you see any redirects, you know, that didn't get pulled in, any 404 errors that you're seeing in Google Search Console, make sure you add those additional ones in to make sure that, you know, you're having those don't, traffic doesn't get lost on those.
Yeah, if you're doing a new site in HubSpot and your old site was also in HubSpot, check your redirect list as well, because you may have a redirect in place from eons ago that's causing a problem with another redirect that you added or with a different URL that you put in. So keeping an eye on these things is hugely important as you go, just to fix any new errors that you've created.
Yeah, redirect
or someone else has created.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, redirect chains or two of the same redirects going to two different URLs is going to really throw off, you know, how the site actually operates. So it's important to know what's in there.
Yeah. So some of the FAQs, if you had to just narrow it down to a short list, what would be the most important thing to check?
I would say, you know, going to Google Search Console, Google is very helpful in telling you errors right away when they're found. So, you know, within the first week or two, well, you know, I check a couple times within the first couple weeks of a site launch and check for, you know, coverage errors and things like that. That's probably my most important thing that that I would check. Then you can see if you're seeing a drop in, you know, index pages that you want to be indexed or any other issues or errors that are coming up, and you can fix those right away.
Yeah, and I'll touch on some of the other offsite changes that need to be made because those are the ones that are forgotten the most because you don't see them happening and you don't see the errors that happen. But if you've changed URLs of any of your location pages or services pages, you might need to go into Google My Business and update those links, or even, you know, things you don't think about when you set up your Facebook page in 2015, you might need to go and update that URL as well. If you've had any changes to where it's landing to or where you want to send people to, any old tracking that you're using in URLs and offsite sources, definitely check those. And like Missy said, keep an eye on Google Search Console because they'll let you know if people are coming to your site and hitting 404 pages that you aren't getting errors from your internal crawl. What are some common items that can cause rankings to drop post-launch?
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of nuances that can come up. Probably the biggest thing is content related. So if you've removed a lot of content from the site, consolidated pages, but didn't keep that content. You might see a lot of changes, especially if you had 3 pages that had unique title tags and H1 tags that were very unique. You consolidated those and got rid of a lot of content. You're likely going to see some ranking drops if you got rid of a lot of blog content. I was talking to Tanya about this. I worked on a website that they got rid of most of their blogs. They wanted to speak to a very niche audience. Well, a lot of that was bringing traffic to the site. And so, rankings did drop quite a bit. And it's really, a decision factor that, whoever's in charge of making those decisions needs to understand and know that, you might see rankings drop, and it could be for terms that were, higher funnel keywords, but could have still drove conversions. It's really, or they could have been irrelevant terms that aren't really driving traffic. So it's important to kind of consider those elements. I think other things that can cause some rankings to drop, obviously we already talked about like the robots file, but even no index tags, sometimes those are used in development and aren't removed. Internal linking, if there were pages that were linked, especially from high level pages on the site, and those were moved to, either not linked anymore or linked from, obscure places on the website, you might see, some rankings drop because you're basically telling Google that you don't, determine those as important pages to link from a main navigation or a top level page anymore. And so they might consider those less important.
I think the only other thing I'd add to that, Missy, is the redirect strategy. So we've seen sites where they've, drastically changed a lot of their URLs, and instead of mapping their redirects, like the pages are pretty much the same, they just name the URLs. So instead of saying, this page goes to this page and this page goes to this page, they just blanket redirected all of them to a main page. Yeah. So then when Google is showing those pages in the search result, the page that was really relevant to that keyword phrase, when you click through to it and you get redirected to the home page, it's no longer relevant. So your quality score drops, your user experience drops, and then you can lose like a good chunk of your rankings in the search results, which could have easily been avoided if it was just a one-to-one redirect, because then you still have a solid user experience and your content is still there to support that ranking.
Yeah, easy isn't always the best the best method.
Nope. And when should you do your post-launch checklist? Right away? Give it a few weeks?
A lot of these items you really want to check right away, and to, as I mentioned, checking those within the first couple of weeks on a regular basis, to make sure that any errors are coming up. It can kind of be done over time, maybe the first month or so, but I would, make sure you're checking at least in the first couple of days, the first week in Google Search Console, and some of those other things you can, obviously look at over time and improve just like any of your other SEO efforts, but some of the major issues you want to make sure to check right away.
Yeah. And as you said earlier, like SEO is a long-term strategy and it's an ongoing thing. So you might fix it all up and have your site 100% perfect. And then somebody's uploading images that are way too ginormous and you need to come back in and just keep working on it. Reporting, there's if you are working with a team who cares about the success of the website launch, they're going to ask you for reports. You might be working with people that are like, new sites up, we're done here. But if you are asked to report on the success of the site launch, what are some of those things that you're going to want to track? And I've already said it a few times, and so have you, Missy, but really making sure that you identify from the very, very beginning, what are the objectives of our website and what are the objectives of this site redesign or new site launch, to really tie it all back in. So when you get distracted with like, our keyword rankings are dropping for completely like non-focused keywords, you can drive it back to what that main goal is and keep people working towards the same goal.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of the other things that we recommend having a baseline for at the start so that you can track the changes for post-launch, are making sure you're keeping track of your keyword rankings. So you're probably using a tool like Ahrefs or Moz or SEMrush, or even checking in Google Search Console and seeing what keywords they're showing you there. Your organic traffic, of course, that's ultimately what our success is tied to. So making sure that your organic traffic is aligned. Some things that you will find is if you do have a lot of redirects in place, you're going to see a shift in your Google Analytics reporting after, where a lot of these might not show up as organic traffic because it's going through the redirect to get there. So you might see a big increase in, either direct or just other or referral traffic. So when you're seeing that, just being aware of where it's coming from. And then once those links get sorted out in the SERPs, it'll correct itself. Keep an eye on traffic changes from other sources. If you had some big links coming in from somewhere and now those links are gone, you might lose some of that traffic. If someone else has a website that's sending traffic to you and now all their visitors get our 404s, that's a really poor user experience. So they're going to cut your links pretty quick. And then going through and doing a technical audit of the website as well. Missy, do you want to go through those, Pete?
Sure. So yeah, this is where you want to look at, do kind of a more in-depth audit of your SEO elements, looking at site speed and performance, once you get enough data in Google Analytics to see how your overall site speed and page speeds have changed, doing, lighthouse tests or page speed insight tests are going to be helpful there. Looking at your core web vitals, to see, especially in Google Search Console, to identify if you have issues with pages and are not getting that rankings boost. Mobile friendly pages, if those change, you want to identify those. You can see those in Google Search Console. Looking at your indexing coverage, again in Google Search Console, to understand changes in the pages that are getting indexed, and fixing any issues or adjusting any pages that should be indexed that are not showing. And then looking at status codes, obviously these are important. The 200 successful status codes is really what you want to see, and little or no other, obviously redirects from outside sources, are going to happen, but you want to avoid any internal redirects if possible. Obviously, any 404 or 403, any kind of 400 error codes, server errors, things like that. You definitely want to fix those and identify them, quickly.
Some of the questions we get are, what should I include in a post-launch report? And I think that we've covered most of those in the checklist there. And then, when should I run a post-launch report? Is it the kind of thing that you can run right away, or should you give it a month's worth of data? Missy, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I like to wait at least a month to really run a report that's going to show, it's going to give enough data, especially with keywords. Usually most keyword tools don't give daily data, and even if they do, Google takes a little while to react sometimes to changes. So, looking at a full month's data is going to really help to get a better idea of how the search engines adjust to your new site, and to gather enough information to really understand, what's going on, and if you've had improvements or declines in certain areas, you're going to be able to see those better than if you're only looking at a shorter time period.
I totally agree. And I would say that you should even do like another quarterly one after, just to show, yeah. But that's not to say that you should put it off. So for the next question of, what if the data is wrong, or what if it's right? And we're doing really poorly now. So that's why it's so important to check your data right away and to keep an eye on it. Even if you're not putting together a post-launch report yet, keeping an eye on that data to make sure that your Google Analytics is still in place, that you're tracking, your conversion tracking and event tracking still in place. Maybe you forgot to put up your remarketing code and now none of your remarketing ads are working as they should. Keeping an eye on that data is really important. And having done that recon at the start to identify everything that needs to be pulled over to the new site is really important, because it's easier to go back and check the old tracking code than to have to dig up new tracking code. If the data is wrong, usually what is at play is you haven't applied the right filters that you used to have in place, or you've applied too many new filters and it's filtering out.
Yeah.
Yep. Or, if the data is really bad, definitely look into it. Our first feeling might be to get really defensive and be like, but I did everything. So always check what could be wrong. We were talking with a potential client yesterday that says we've seen a huge drop in, our inbound leads. So going back and identifying, is this a drop in leads because it's a drop in traffic, or is it a drop in leads because there's something, there's a conversion piece that's missing, or is it a drop because we're just not tracking them anymore? So really identifying where that break is can help you identify how you're going to need to go about to fix it. Missy, what do you think you should look for in the data? Is there any potential warning signs, anything in particular that you should keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think looking at, overall, you kind of start with especially in Google Analytics, looking at your acquisition by channel to really understand, what changes you're seeing. If you're seeing traffic drop, and users drop, conversions drop, or, obviously you want to see them increase, so that's a good sign. But if you're seeing, changes in there, those are, kind of the big things to look at, looking at each channel. To really understand if there's changes, and especially if you didn't have campaigns turned off for very long, you shouldn't see a big change there. Once you identify that there might be declines, really digging in on a page level, looking at drops in individual pages. I like to even, jump over to Google Search Console when I see, page drops, and compare before and after in terms of clicks and impressions and rankings, to see, on a page by page basis where those are, and then digging in on a query keyword level to understand, where are we seeing these losses, doing keyword reporting to see, what specific pages, if there are, a group of pages that are seeing the biggest losses, maybe those are the ones you want to focus on first for optimization, or, to consider maybe we took out too much of the content of those pages and need to kind of rework that back into the site, or, create new pages to fill that gap.
Yeah, and I'd add to that too, just to look at the differences in mobile and desktop behavior and traffic as well, because we often build these sites, even if we're building mobile first, we're building them on desktops and laptops, and often, different mobile considerations aren't taken into consideration. So definitely watch the data on that, because that is a common gap that we've seen. And if you have a website that has a lot of returning traffic, but now you have a spike in new visits, could just be that, cookies are cleared. You're a new site, you've got new tracking. That's normal too. So keep an eye on that to level out a little bit over time. And what are the most common SEO issues that happen after a website migration? I think we've covered a lot of these. So I'll just go through and I'll recap just some of the tops, like not having a proper redirect strategy and now you have a bunch of 404s, or having too much content consolidation that you completely neglect a huge chunk of traffic that you used to have. No index, no follow. Number one. Missy, what would you add to that?
So yeah, obviously the no index, no follow, but to tie to that, the disallow and the robots file, not really looking at the data afterwards, and not considering like errors and 404 errors, not redirecting those and following up to keep an eye on those. Things might happen a month or a week, 2 weeks more after that. Google didn't find those URLs or didn't crawl them yet, and they do in a later crawl. So don't just assume that everything's going to come up right after launch and that you're good to go if you don't see any issues right away. I think as we said, SEO is a long game. Google changes their rules all the time. And so, and also just, like I said, they might not have gotten crawled yet. So, keeping an eye on those and just making sure that you're constantly checking back and reporting, I think is really important to make sure that, you're catching any issues.
And now we would open it up for Q&A, but this is a recorded video, so you don't get the chance to. So instead, you can email us. My email is tanya@chronicsdigital.com. Missy's is missy@chronicsdigital.com. You can @chronicsdigital us on Twitter or Instagram or wherever you hang out on socials. And if you want a PDF copy of that checklist, reach out to us, we'll give you that. Or if you have any questions about any of the specifics here in HubSpot or in WordPress, just let us know and we'll get you all that info you need. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.